Good morning, class. It is Tuesday, and we are beginning with the presidential election of 1876. The picture here at the beginning shows a old train, and this is the tail car, and this was a common practice back in that time period for candidates, presidential candidates, to ride a car from town to town and give speeches. So instead of a caboose, the last car was a candidate's car, and he occupied this car, and whatever the candidate was, the schedule was given out, and every town, the party, whether you were Republican or Democrat, knew the schedule, and they knew you were coming in on the 10:15 train. And so the party in advance told everyone, had everything prepared, and so probably for half an hour before, locals had been giving speeches, there had been bands playing rah-rah for the party, and then the train came in. The stop varied in length. He may have 10 minutes, he may have 15 minutes. And from the back of the train, as loud as he could bellow out his speech, he gave his speech to the crowd that had gathered. And as the train pulled away, he yelled his final remarks. And the next town it pulled into, the same thing went on. The town had been forewarned. They, had the crowd there. He gave his little speech for however many minutes it was there, and off the train went. It was known that in some cases a candidate could give up to 33, 36 speeches in a day in this manner by riding the train and going from town to town. You are reading before test number 1 two lectures that are on D2L. One is about D.L. Moody. He was a famous United States evangelist. He began his career during the Civil War serving as a chaplain. After the Civil War, he would become an evangelist throughout the United States and hold revival meetings. He would come to town, and in advance he would rent out the biggest building, the biggest coliseum, the biggest place he could find, and he would hold meetings there. He is sort of the John the Baptist, the forerunner of this style in the United States. His successor, Billy Sunday, would do the same kind of thing. His successor, Billy Graham, would do the same kind of thing. Billy Graham passed away, I think, within the past 2 years or so. Billy Graham was well known, not only in the United States, but worldwide. And he would get the biggest coliseums, places in town. I remember, this is really dating me, it's got to have been 35 years ago or so. I was working in Anaheim at the time, and the Angels, I think it was the Angels, the Anaheim A's stadium, A's stand for the Angels, I think, was being rented out for a Billy Graham crusade. That's what they used to call them, the crusade. And a coworker and myself went, and he had a week-long evening series there. And later they told that that was the biggest attendance ever on record for the Anaheim Stadium. No sports event, no conference, no anything had ever filled the Anaheim Stadium as full as the Billy Graham crusade had. And D.L. Moody was the one that started that practice. Well in advance, advertising, coming to town, getting the biggest facility he could find, and holding his meetings. So please, before test number 1, read that lecture. There will be questions on the test from that lecture. And the election of 1876. With Grant put out of the way, the Republicans chose Rutherford B. Hayes, a man obscure enough to be dubbed the Great Unknown. Though not brilliant, he possessed common sense and uncommon ability. He was a grade B war hero. He appealed to the Civil War veterans. He had been wounded several times. He had risen to the ranks of a major general of the volunteers. 3 times he had served as governor of Ohio. Because of its large number of electoral votes, Ohio had become the modern mother of presidents. Electoral votes. We are coming up to a presidential election here in November. And at that time, Ohio was the 3rd most populous state. In 1776, New York was the most populous, Pennsylvania the 2nd, and Ohio the 3rd. The mother of presidents prior to this had always been Virginia. Of our first 5 presidents, Washington, not Adams, he was a Massachusetts man, Jefferson, Madison, and Monroe had all been Virginia men. We have had quite a few presidents besides them, also out of Virginia. So Virginia had been the mother of presidents. Now, Ohio was beginning to supplant Virginia as the mother of presidents. A political saying of the time went, some are born great, some achieve greatness, and some are born in Ohio. Now, currently, in the United States, the most electorally, this is off the subject, the most electorally potent state is California. I'm not looking in the back of our textbook, so I don't know exactly, but California has something like 56 electoral votes, the most electorally potent. The second most electorally potent state is the great state of Texas, and we're somewhere around 35, 36 electoral votes. So, in the last days before we vote on November, first Tuesday in November, whatever day that comes out to be. First Tuesday in November, when we go to the polls, that last week before the election, the candidates are not in Rhode Island. They are not in North Dakota. They are not in Alaska trying to drum up those last votes. Who cares about Rhode Island's 4 electoral votes and North and South Dakota's 3 each and Alaska's 3? That really is not where they're targeting. They're after the Big 10, or actually today, the Big 11. If you take the 11 top states, you can lose the other 38 and still win the election if you're going for the electoral vote, which is what wins you. That is why the census is so important. Every 10 years, they redivvy the same number of electoral votes amongst the states. We've capped it off. There will only be this number of electoral votes. And so they are after people. Fill in the census. Send it in. Call in the census. Get on your computers. Send in the census on your computers. Count everybody in your households. They're not after you to find out if you're an illegal alien, if you are harboring illegal aliens. They are not after you to find out, have you paid child support? Any of that stuff. They're not going to get you and make you serve on a jury if you fill out the census. None of that happens. All they are trying to find out is how many people are living in Texas so that we can get an even bigger number of electoral votes and have a even bigger impact on our position in the United States. So if your family has not done the census yet, please Do it. Count everybody in your household, even babies that have just been born. We need to count every citizen in Texas. Well, at that point, Ohio was the second most populous state. Hayes had proved himself to be a courageous and honest administrator. To the delight of reformers, he had come out for cleaning up the civil service. His platform promised reform, sound money, and permanent pacification of the South. Hayes is running with William Weaver as his vice presidential candidate. He is running against the Democrat Samuel J. Tilden, smooth-shaven, baby-face Tilden. We'll talk about that in a minute. And Tilden has Hendricks as his running mate. The reason this idea of him coming out for cleaning up the civil service and promising reform, sound money, and permanent pacification of the South is so important is because the nation has just endured 8 years under Grant, the most corrupt years of United States history. And here is a political poster for Rutherford B. Hayes and Wheeler, Liberty and Union, for president and for vice presidency, and a ribbon that people would wear for their candidates. The boys in blue, vote for Hayes and Wheeler. The boys in blue, the Union. He was a northern person, fought for the North, was wounded for the North. The North, the Republicans won the war. So all you Union boys, vote for Hayes. He fought for the North. Another Republican cartoon from that time period. Here they're making fun, this is once again Hayes, of Tilden. Tilden, smooth-shaven, was always seen as very boyish. And here, we'd taken his toy away, and Tilden is crying, and there is the White House in the background. Roll along, shout the campaign battle song. And here is Hayes, headed up the road to the Capitol. And all the states lining up to vote for him, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, etc. National Road, Ohio to Washington. A good, honest load of Hayes. Oh, how cute. On the way to Washington is the Republican campaign song. Samuel J. Tilden, the bachelor governor of New York, received the Democratic nomination. Although he had made a national reputation by helping to smash the Tweed Ring, Tilden was unimpressive in appearance. Boyish face, smooth-shaven, he was slightly built, sickly. One eyelid drooped. He was nervous, weak-voiced. They used to call him Whispering Sammy. His talents were intellectual rather than oratorical. Republicans again unfurled the frayed, bloody shirt and shouted. The bloody shirt means showing your blood-stained shirt. You fought, you were wounded in the war. Avoid rebel rule. No, every Southerner was not a Democrat. There were Northern Democrats too. But for the majority, the South was Democrat, the North was Republican. So they shout, avoid rebel rule, vote as you shot, and the boys in blue will see it through. They pointed with pride to Hayes' spotless record and proclaimed, "Hooray for Hayes and honest ways." The Democrats countered with, "Turn the rascals out," and Tilden and reform. And once again, Samuel J. Tilden of New York, once again, very electorally potent state to be from. And this is a campaign ribbon that someone would have worn. And Hendricks from Indiana. And Ship of State, reform. Tilden for president and Hendricks for vice president. As the returns poured in, Tilden quickly amassed 184 electoral votes of the needed 185. To win the election, you needed 185. Well, very quickly, Tilden won 184. There were 20 doubtful votes that came in. And these votes were doubtful because of irregular returns. 19 of the irregular returns comprised the total electoral votes of 3 states, the states of Louisiana, Florida, and South Carolina. The 20th came from one of the 3 states, 3 votes from Oregon. And one of the electors, it turned out, was ineligible. He shouldn't have been an elector because he was a federal office holder. The Constitution says an elector can't be a federal office holder. That's conflict of interest. He was a postmaster, so his vote was invalid. Now, Oregon, obviously the West Coast, was voting Republican. So that vote that was lost here should have gone to Hayes. Hayes only had racked up at this point 165 votes. So he should have gotten that one 166. But we are now at 166 versus 184. He needs 1. He needs 185 to win. Now, let's look at this. The Solid South is the Solid South, not because they grow cotton, but because they were solidly Democratic. It's all about politics. They were solidly Democratic. And do you think Louisiana, South Carolina, and Florida would have voted Republican? Not a chance. Irregular returns got turned in. Some funny business went on here. And those 19 votes should have gone to Hayes. All he needed was 1. He didn't need 19. He just needed 1. Who should have won the election? Did I say Hayes? Tilden. I'm sorry. These 3 states should have gone to Tilden. He needs 1. Tilden should have won the election. Well, let's look at it. In the popular vote, Tilden won 51%. Hayes won 48%. In both the popular and, had we done it correctly, the electoral, Tilden won the election. The nation was sick and tired of Grant and all of his corruption. Now, was Grant himself personally corrupt? Absolutely not. The problem was Grant was not a politician. He didn't know how to run things. He was a military man. And so he let a lot of his cronies and people that he was impressed with in positions of power. And he was tenaciously devoted to them, even when they were caught with their hand in the cookie jar, even when their hand had gotten slapped and the lid clanged down on their hand, he was tenaciously loyal to them. He could not see dishonesty in them, and to the end he would hold out, tenaciously loyal to them. And so he was not dishonest, but the people he allowed to be in power around him were, and they caused our nation to be disgraced in some of the worst manners possible, because he could not discern dishonesty in others. And the nation was tired of 8 years of the stench of dishonesty under Grantism, and they wanted reform. and they wanted it under Tilden. But you don't always get what you were planning on getting. We've got irregular returns under 4 states. And cartoon from the time period. As I cannot take, that's what it's saying down here, as I cannot take both the partners upon me, I must put off the match until I can investigate their respective claims a little further. And so that is exactly what will happen. The issue will have to be investigated. These 20 irregular returns. And here you have Hayes's vote and Tilden's vote. So both candidates are being investigated by, and I'm not sure who this is supposed to represent, Lady Justice, Lady America. This is, of course, before the Statue of Liberty, so you can't say it's the Statue of Liberty, but this is justness, rightness here that is going to decipher what has actually gone on here. Republican leaders quickly sent visiting statesmen to the 3 doubtful Southern states. The Democrats did the same, and all 3 of the disputed Southern states submitted 2 sets of returns, 1 Republican and 1 Democrat. The brutal truth is that both parties in these states had been guilty in some degree of irregularity, including bribery, forgery, ballot box stuffing, intimidation, and violence. As the weeks drifted by, the deadlock tightened. The Constitution merely stipulated that the electoral returns from the states shall be sent to Congress and in the presence of both the House and the Senate. They should be opened by the President of the Senate. But who should count them? On this point, the Constitution was silent. Oh, good heavens, the Constitution never could foresee all of these little teeny pieces of this and that. Who'd have thought they ever needed to worry about who should count them? They should be sent to the House and the Senate, and they should be opened by the President of the Senate. Well, the guy that opens them, shouldn't he be the one that then counts them and reads out the tally? Well, if you're in a situation where you would rather have the House count them and read out the tally, well, then this suddenly becomes an issue. Who should count them? If they were counted by the President of the Senate, who the Constitution said should open them, he was a Republican, and the Republican returns would be selected. So if he got the returns from Florida, a Republican set and a Democratic set, which one is he going to open? He's going to open the Republican set because he's a Republican. But if they were to be counted, this guy just opens them. But if the Speaker of the House, who is a Democrat, is to open or is to read, to count the results, being a Democrat, he would choose to read and count the Democratic returns. Such dealings. The compromise of 1877 was finally reached. The deadlock was broken by the Electoral Count Act, which was passed by Congress early in 1877. It set up an electoral commission consisting of 15 men selected from the Senate, the House, and the Supreme Court. Its composition had to be an odd number, therefore 15 members. The Senate was a Republican majority. That's why if it was opened by the Senate, he would have chosen the Republican returns. So, being in a majority there, they sent 3 Republican members, 2 Democratic members. The House was in a Democratic majority, 2 Republicans, 3 Democrats. The Supreme Court. The Supreme Court. Now, that's another whole ball of wax. The Supreme Court is not to be partisan. They are not to have an opinion. Their job is to interpret the Constitution as the creators of the Constitution, our founding fathers, intended it to be construed. That is their job. They are not to have a political opinion. Now, everyone is biased. Everyone is prejudiced. Everyone has a predisposition. We come to it through the experiences of our life. And so a president's effectiveness oftentimes can be measured more by who he puts on the Supreme Court than by his 4 or 8 years in office. Because some presidents don't get to elect anybody to the Supreme Court. Some presidents get to elect a couple. We've had 2 presidents get to appoint every single last justice to the Supreme Court. Every single last justice to the Supreme Court. Guess who? The first one is very obvious. George Washington. He is the first president, and we have no justices, so he gets to appoint all the justices. And the second one is Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He is elected 4 times to the presidency. Now, he serves in his 4th term only a couple of months before he dies, but he is in there so long, and so many of the justices are so old that quite a few of them retire, that he ultimately gets to appoint all 9 justices. Now, the Constitution does not say how many justices are to be on the Supreme Court, other than it must be an odd number so you don't have a tie. We have not always had 9. We've had 5. We've had, I don't know if we've had 7, but I know we've at least had 5. But for a long time, we've had 9. And so that has become the golden number. And FDR actually proposed to change the number of justices from 9 to 15. And oh boy, that was the first time in his administration that even his own party smacked him upside the head and says, you do not mess with the Supreme Court. You do not do that. But 2 men, yes, got to completely appoint every member to the Supreme Court. So far in his term, our current president, Trump, has gotten to appoint 2 justices. Now, being a Republican, he has appointed justices that are Republican in nature. Now, they are supposed to be apolitical. They are not to have a political mind, Republican or Democrat. But like I said, everyone has a bias. Once you are on the Supreme Court, the only way you can be removed from the Supreme Court is if you are impeached, the same as the president, for high crimes and misdemeanors, or if you die, or choose to resign, to step down. You are on for life. And so if you decide, I was put on by a Republican president, appointed by a Republican president, but I'm now going to start voting very liberally. Hey, there is nobody that can stop you. Or if you were put on by a liberal president and you suddenly start voting very conservatively, there is nothing anyone can do. Quite often, a president has appointed a justice thinking they are going to vote in this manner and suddenly find out a few years down the line, that man is not doing what I intended him to do. And there's not a thing you can do about it. He's in there for life, unless he is committing high crimes and misdemeanors. Their job is to interpret the Constitution. So anyway, gotten quite far off the track there. We have 15 votes. So the Electoral Commission is now going to decide these 19 other votes from these other states. In February of 1877, you're saying, what do you mean February? President takes office in January. No. The date when the election takes place has always been the same from the very first, from when George was elected. But During FDR's administration, the time when the president takes office was changed. Constitutional amendment, go to the back of your book, look up your amendments. During his administration, the time period was reduced. You got elected in November. You did not take office until March 4th. Unless March 4th fell on a Sunday, then you took office on March 5th. That long time period of 5 months, it was felt was just too long. And times have changed. Back then, in Georgia's time, horse and buggy till you got everything moved to Washington, D.C., you needed that time. Nowadays, we don't need that time. We're on trains, cars, planes. It's not necessary. And so during FDR's administration, the date that the president takes office was moved up to January. And I think it's January 20th and probably the 21st if the 20th falls on a Sunday. So, but this was back then, before that. It is now February 1877, about a month before Inauguration Day. The Senate and the House meets together to settle the dispute. The roll of states was called off alphabetically. A, Alabama, etc. When Florida was reached, Florida is the first of the 3 disputed states. South Carolina and Louisiana would have come later. When Florida was reached, the disputed documents were referred to the Electoral Commission, which sat in a nearby chamber. After long discussion, the partisan vote was, of course, a partisan vote. 8 for the Republican returns and 7 for the Democratic returns. Outraged Democrats undertook to launch a filibuster until hell froze over. Now, what is a filibuster? We're going to launch a filibuster. A filibuster has to do with stopping the progress of what's going on, particularly stopping a vote from taking place. There are rules of how meetings are conducted. In some meetings, they'll open up the floor and say, everyone gets 5 minutes at the mic. When your 5 minutes is up, we take the mic away from you and it's the next guy's turn whether you're done or not. Other times, once you have the mic, you have it for as long as you can keep talking. And once you quit talking, then the next guy gets the mic. A filibuster is when it is that situation and you are stalling. You don't want the vote to take place. You don't want business to continue. You want to stall. And so someone gets a hold of the mic. He's up there at the desk and he's talking and holding up the proceedings. As long as he keeps talking and doesn't sit down, nothing can happen. This happens every once in a while. We had it a couple years ago in our state of Texas, in Austin, in our Congress, where they launched a filibuster. What do you have to say or read or do during a filibuster? Anything you want. There have been cases of Congress people getting up there and reading cookbooks. This is how you make apple pie. As long as they keep talking. Now, if they have to go potty and take a break, the filibuster's over. If they get hoarse and have to go get a drink, the filibuster's over. If they get tired and have to take a nap, the filibuster's over. As long as they can stand and keep going, the filibuster stalls all progress from taking place. So if you've got a good bladder and a good voice and you can keep going, that's as long as you can keep the filibuster going. And the Democrats said, we're going to launch a filibuster until hell freezes over. If on the first state it comes back partisan 8-7, how are the other states' results going to come back? Exactly the same. Well, continued compromise resulted in the Democrats reluctantly agreeing. Fine, we got it figured out. We're not going to win. Hayes might take office, but in return, we want something. First of all, he will withdraw intimidating federal troops from the last two southern states, Louisiana and South Carolina. Now let's go back up here. Louisiana and South Carolina. Hey, those were two of the states that turned in funky returns. They still have federal troops occupying those two southern states. Carpetbag governments, they're still under military rule as part of Reconstruction. No wonder. Well, who knows why, but maybe that's why. Well, hey, you end Reconstruction in these two southern states, and that's one of the things you must give us if we let you have all 20 of the votes. He needs all 20 to make 185. He only needs one. He needs all 20. Secondly, they said, if you agree to support a bill subsidizing the Texas and Pacific Railroad's construction of a southern transcontinental line. Now, way back after the Mexican-American War, we had bought from Mexico the Gadsden Purchase, this piece of land right here, because we first mapped out a central route for the Transcontinental Railroad. That didn't actually end up going through until after the Civil War. But we bought the Gadsden Purchase as part of the Compromise of 1850. We promised the South we will put through a Southern Transcontinental Railroad. Compromise of 1850. Have we ever done that? Did we ever prove good on that promise? No. We're now in the 1870s, and the South still has no transcontinental railroad. We bought that stretch of desert, the Gadsden Purchase, from Mexico for $10 million, and we still haven't built the railroad. Well, now we promise again. We will support a bill to subsidize the Texas and Pacific Railroad's construction of a southern transcontinental line. Not all of these promises were kept in later years, including the Texas and Pacific subsidy. Strike two. Bam! We still own the Gadsden Purchase. And strike two, we still haven't gotten the southern route. Do we have the southern route today? Yes, but not because of this piece of negotiating. So close was the margin of safety that the issue was settled only 3 days before the new president was sworn in. 3 days! 3 days! Can you imagine this? Oh, Mrs. Hayes, Mrs. Tilden, they must be tearing their hair out. Do we pack up the house and get ready to go to D.C.? Do we not? Do we get ready for the inaugural ball? I mean, this is a huge deal. Do I buy a dress for the ball? Do I not buy a dress for the ball? Will I even be at the ball? Oh, what a tearing. Women want to know these things. Come on. All during this compromise time. Tilden Hayes, of the two evils, choose the worst. And man, it got nasty. Tilden or blood. Tilden or blood. Psh, psh, psh. Yes. And the inauguration. President Hayes. I don't know why they did that, but, and the beautiful Miss Hayes. And inauguration. Maybe she never even made it to the inauguration. She definitely is not shown on this side of the crowd. This is Hayes here, and we definitely don't see her in the close-up in the group. Wait. Women didn't come then. I'm forgetting. It was William Howard Taft. His wife was the first one to come to the inauguration. Yes, inaugural ball, that's a different matter. But although there is a woman there, but his wife was the first, Taft's wife was the first one to ride with him to the inauguration. And we'll come to that when we come to Taft. And once again, here we've got the, oh boy, trying to see who is who here. I take it that this is Hayes being sworn in right there, I would assume. With the Hayes-Tilden deal, the Republican Party quietly abandoned its commitment to black equality. Reconstruction, for better or worse, was now officially ended. Rutherford, or as they called him, Rutherford B. Hayes, old 8 to 7, and his fraudulency were nicknames given to Hayes. They deeply cut him. He wasn't the one wheeling, dealing, and making all these decisions. It was the parties making these decisions. He was an upright man. He began vigorously and impressively. He selected a top-notch cabinet, including an ex-Confederate, General D.M. Key, as Postmaster General. Several weeks after taking office, Hayes boldly withdrew the last federal troops that were supporting carpetbag governments. So no more carpetbag governments in the South. Hayes also enjoyed great success in cleaning out the New York Customs House. This key agency was a hotbed of politics and vital cog in Senator Roscoe Conklin's political machine. The collector of the port was Chester A. Arthur, who would later become President of the United States. He had become deeply involved in questionable political activities as a henchman of Senator Conklin, and he was removed by President Hayes. Here you have Hayes with charges kicking Chester A. Arthur out of the New York Customs House. But unfortunately, or shall I say fortunately for Chester A. Arthur, it kicks him out and on the road to the Capitol. He will become future President of the United States. Has he ever been found guilty of corruption while serving under Conklin? No. But when you associate with the wrong crowd, are you suspected of the same things? Yes. What's that old phrase? He who lays down with dogs rises up with fleas. Yes, so guilt by association. Early on, Hayes declared himself to be a single-termer, and this decision proved to be a face-saver because he possibly could not have won renomination in any event. And the next topic we are going to cover is 16-1, the bimetallic issue. But I am going to stop at this moment and give you a break, and we will pick up in the next video.